I'm now for a check of the top business news stories. I'm joined by Kate Moody. Hi there, Kate.
Hi there.
Let's take a closer look at the French government's €100 billion stimulus plan, and specifically the promise to create jobs.
That is the number one priority for Emmanuel Macron's government, creating and protecting jobs, because despite the huge state-sponsored furlough program that prevented wide-scale layoffs during the lockdown, 500,000 people have lost their jobs in just the first half of this year. And economists have warned that as government support is scaled back, there could be a huge uptick in job cuts and bankruptcies. Now, to that end, Prime Minister Jean Castex is funneling over €7.5 billion to extend the paid leave scheme for businesses that need it. Economy Minister Bruno Le Maire clarifying this evening on French TV that the scheme would indeed be extended into next year for sectors that are still struggling. Almost €7 billion, meanwhile, will help get young people into the workforce. Take a listen to the French Prime Minister speaking earlier.
Notre priorité absolue, c'est l'emploi. Avec ce plan, nous soutenons dès aujourd'hui l'emploi de ces premières victimes de la crise, les jeunes et les demandeurs d'emploi. Nous investissons donc massivement dans la formation pour les métiers et les filières de demain, la transition écologique, l'industrie innovante, le numérique par exemple.
Well, about a third of the overall funds are earmarked for investment in green industry and energy transition, although critics say that state aid to companies should have required more concrete commitments to reducing pollution. The government insists it's not just about protecting the environment. The program will also help boost the economy, protect businesses, and create jobs too. Fraser Jackson reports.
When Jean L'Aigle built this house in the 80s, energy conservation wasn't on his list of priorities. But now, with the French government spending billions of euros on an ecological overhaul, he's decided to get a piece of the action and install some insulation.
J'ai des revenus très bas, donc je vais recevoir le maximum de la prime rénov', c'est-à-dire 18 000 €.
Jean is one of a vast number of people who can benefit from the state's latest initiative to cut greenhouse gases. Around 5 million homes in France are classed as energy guzzlers, about 17% of all residences. €7 billion have now been pledged to make buildings more green. And that's just a fraction of the 30 billion announced in Emmanuel Macron's latest scheme to stimulate the economy.
En fait, ce volet, il soutient la transformation écologique de tous les secteurs qui sont fortement émetteurs de gaz à effet de serre ou le plus fortement émetteur de gaz à effet de serre. Traditionnellement, on identifie 4 secteurs qui sont les transports, les bâtiments, l'énergie et l'industrie et enfin l'agriculture.
Among the new green initiatives, €11 billion of the 30 are going to the transport sector, half of which will transform rural railways and freight lines. Money will also go to support public transport and the building of new bike lanes. €9 billion will be spent on decarbonising industry and helping companies clean up their act. The government is hoping to reduce agriculture's reliance on pesticides and increase the amount of locally grown produce. Help will also be given to protect forests from the effects of climate change. The money will be spent over the coming years before the next presidential election in 2022.
Let's check in on the day's trading action now. Wall Street has sharply reversed course after a rally that had brought stocks to new record highs earlier this week. We're seeing a huge sell-off. The Dow Jones plunging some 900 points there. The Nasdaq down over 5% with just under an hour of trade to go. The tech sector, as you can see, especially hit hard. Apple shares are down around 7%. Facebook, Amazon, and Google down around 5% each. One markets analyst saying that this market euphoria had reached a tentative peak on signs that the labor market recovery in the U.S. is stalling. Others saying it's merely a correction after too many gains. We saw losses for the major European indices as well as manufacturing and economic activity across the Eurozone showed signs of slowing down in August. The CAC 40 faring a bit better than the DAX and FTSE 100, down just under half a percentage point at the close. Shares of pharmaceutical giants GlaxoSmithKline and Sanofi both dropped slightly, despite their announcement that they'll begin human tests of a possible coronavirus vaccine. The number of Americans seeking unemployment benefits fell to its lowest level since the start of the coronavirus pandemic last week. 881,000 people filed claims. That's down from a peak of nearly 7 million in a single week back in March. The number of continuing claims fell as well to around 13 million. It still remains much higher than the worst week of the financial crisis a decade ago. An economist said that the labour market had begun changing the way it counts claims, which could have artificially deflated last week's figures. There are other worrying signs for the labour market as well. Data on Wednesday showed the private sector had added only 428,000 jobs in August, half of what had been expected. Airlines are among the major employers that have warned they could be cutting tens of thousands of jobs in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, the U.S. trade deficit has risen to its highest level in over a decade, $63.6 billion, as the U.S. imported nearly 19% more than it exported during the month of July. Well, meanwhile, in the UK, Amazon says it plans to create a further 7,000 permanent jobs by the end of this year, bringing its total for 2020 to 10,000 new positions there. The e-commerce giant is also taking on 20,000 additional staff in temporary jobs during the holiday season. Most of those positions will be in warehouses and sorting and delivery stations. While traditional retailers have struggled during the pandemic, Amazon has seen a huge jump in demand, with online orders accounting for 28% of overall spending in the UK. Of course, Tom, it's not all good news for Amazon. The company has faced stiff criticism over the past months from unions about the way it treats its staff and whether it really protects its workers enough during this health crisis.